We're going to ask that everybody mute at this point, and as we get started tonight. About a year ago this time, we went to all Zoom for this meeting and for this lecture, and we are in discussion with Unity right now about the idea of going back to in live and on Zoom as a hybrid meeting. And we're getting positive feedback from both the church and from our speakers. And so hopefully watch the emails that we send out, and we're hoping that if not next month, the month after, we can go back to an in-person presentation. And if you're more comfortable at home, certainly you can continue to watch from Zoom. But we're pretty excited to try to move back towards some level of normalcy. The church is set up to where there will be spacing and so forth, because safety is always going to be paramount. Safety as driven by the science and CDC and our best efforts to try to keep everybody as safe as we can. On the Zoom call today is also Dr. Dina Hijazi, who is co-founder with me with D2 Counseling. And our group is known for doing family systems approach. We do a lot of family work, and we have a lot of groups, a lot of experiential work, as well as individual work with all age groups, and we do couples as well as groups. And we'd like to welcome you. If you want CEUs in this process, please, I will put in the chat here directly, I'll put in a process by which you can reach out to our office, and if you're interested in CEUs, you can get that via email to do that. And with that, Dr. Hijazi, did you have anything else tonight?
Just to welcome everybody, and especially our speaker, Mark, who is Mark Bird, who's a colleague and friend of both of ours, and who has written an incredibly useful book that I refer to. And he's always got multiple things going at the same time, and has about 6,000 children, I think, on top of that. So he's very, very busy. You have 6 kids, Mark? Is that right?
6 kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So we want to welcome him. We also just want to say to all of you that we are in tough times right now, and I have done some research on how Zoom is affecting us. So I just want to thank all the speakers and Mark tonight for being open to doing this on Zoom, and also thank the audience for being so loyal through this year. This is, it's been tough for all of us, but we do have some really interesting research about what Zoom is actually doing to our brains and how hard we are working to regulate ourselves. And I just want to share a couple little things that might be useful to you as you go forward. Some of the studies that have come out of Stanford and Harvard have compared the actual head size on a Zoom screen to what that would be in actual live, and it's under 2 feet. So it would be as if you're somebody is standing less than 2 feet away from you. And that, in fact, is in the proximity of threat range for humans. So our brain stems get lit up when we're on these Zoom calls, because it's firing away that we are actually in a threatening situation, which means that our prefrontal cortex has to work extra hard to calm the central nervous system. So I think it's just important to know that is the Zoom fatigue. It is the cognitive overload that many of us feel, whether you're speaking or receiving. We all tend to speak on an average of 15% louder when we're on a Zoom call. So again, just be aware that that's the effort you're putting in. And so it's being suggested more and more that you give space to yourself in between Zoom calls so that your whole central nervous system can regulate. And the last thing I want to share is that the place that our eyes rest when we meet individuals to assess whether this person is safe and whether we can trust them is the hands. And on Zoom, we don't get to see the hands. So Daniel and I are making a point of waving to people. And this is, again, this is at brainstem level, you know, it's not cortex level. Waving, I speak with my hands a lot, so I do this naturally, but when you're on a call, to make sure that every once in a while you show your hands so that the person receiving can have a sense of trust of you. So I just wanted to pass that on. I think it's really important that we are now getting this data from this year of research, and we can use it to take care of ourselves. So with that, I want to pass it on to Mark, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share tonight. You always have wonderful, wise things to share with us.
Thanks, Dina. Make sure I can get it transferred over to me so people can maybe see me. I wonder why it's not flipping.
To speaker?
How do I get that? Yeah. How do I get that to be? So it shows me.
Yeah.
I do see you.
Yeah, we see you. I'm
Yeah,
seeing
we
Okay.
see you.
All right, we're good then. Sorry about that.
Okay, so you just don't see us.
I don't see you now, but I'll
Welcome
assume
to
that
the
it's,
abyss.
I was seeing you, Dina.
Oh,
So
okay.
That's all I can see. And your hands aren't up, so it's freaking me out. That is kind of a nice intro, because now I'm going to be self-conscious about talking too loud and being right up in all your faces, making you feel threatened. That is really useful information, but it did make me anxious. That's funny. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about thermometers and triangles, temperatures and triangles. I guess I should go over this slideshow so you can see can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So here's our objectives for tonight. I want to help you understand the thermometer, especially as it relates to kind of your own self-awareness and how you manage your feelings. Second, we're going to talk about a lot of different triangles that help inform us about how to better be able to take care of ourselves so we can connect. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some forms of triangulation and healthy triangling versus triangulation. I didn't write that right. And finish up with a little bit more about how to connect once you've achieved that sense of self-connection. So those are our basic objectives. So I'm just going to show this for a second, but this is the thermometer. Conceptually, what I want you to think of on the left-hand side on the bottom, that's kind of the calm space. That's where all of us want to live. It's that I'm on the beach relaxing and nothing is stressing me out at all. Most of us want to live there all the time. I probably live there, you know, once a day or a couple times a week if I'm lucky, but that's where we all would prefer to be, is not emotionally overwhelmed. As we cross over that bottom line, we kind of enter into a zone. There's a doctor, Russian doctor, trying to remember his name right now, who did a lot with child development, and I'm not going to remember his name, but he called it the zone of proximal development. That space right in which we can grow, doesn't give us too much stress and overwhelm us because we don't have the tools for it, but it gives us enough stress that it's helping our development to process. But I call that the zone of growth. So as the temperature increases slowly up, we get a little bit more hot, and a little more hot, until finally we cross the other line, which is what I call the zone of unmanageability. And that's obviously in 12-step language, that's that place step 1 talks about, where we become powerless over the addiction or over other things. So I want you to have this as a visual, but I'm going to exit it while we talk for a minute. So as the temperature increases, there's two other factors that can increase the temperature kind of exponentially. Trauma and shame. I call them trauma and shame bubbles. There's these little packets of energy where if someone steps on them in just the wrong way, they'll set us off, and we'll go from a temperature that's down here or down here to a temperature that's already kind of over the top, where we're in unmanageability again. So there is a role of trauma in how that temperature can be controlled and looked at. So I think I'm going to start at the top of the thermometer. One of the things that's hard about Zoom is there's no audience. I keep wanting to ask a question or something to kind of stimulate discussion. So bear with me. I'm like trying to like, oh wait, you're not talking back. So when we are in that unmanageability place, typically the part of our brain that's activated is the stuff that's related to survival. And it takes us out of our prefrontal cortex and into all those other reactions. Those are fight, flight, and freeze. And I sometimes talk about frenzy. It's not like something that's been studied, but I watch people who kind of do this thing where they try and pretend they're doing something just to get people to calm down. But anyway, when we're in that mode, our system is not well regulated. It's just reacting for our safety. And so the things we tend to experience emotionally at that level are what I call secondary emotions, which are anger and shame. Shame tends to tell us to protect and hide or freeze. Anger tends to be our fight response. When we are in a triggered state, we're really of no use relationally. How many of you in your own relationships, or if you're therapists that work with therapists, have been in a session with people? If you do couple therapy, I'm sure you see this, where everything they're saying is completely different from what they would say in individual therapy because they're so reactive in that moment that they can't even think straight. Everything they're trying to do is basically about destroying connection or destroying the other person, one of the two. So that's a pretty dangerous zone to be relationally interactive in. The only real tool we have for that are timeouts. There might be a few more, but when I was in school, they talked about stop, drop, and roll. That is literally a fire drill, right? Where I had to learn, like they had us practice. They would say, now fall to the floor and roll, and practice that over and over again. The only real way out of that hot state is to have a trained reaction that you know you're going to do automatically when you start feeling that way. So how many of you have I guess by show of, I can't see all of you. Most of us don't have a natural fire drill with our partners or with our family members. We just go into the cycle that we go into and we don't really interact very well. So the first thing we need to develop skill-wise to manage ourselves if we're going to survive in the world is some way to manage emotional reactivity or triggers in our life. So a very literal way to stop, drop, and roll. So if I'm at work and something overwhelms me, how am I going to stop, drop, and roll and get out of that situation successfully without making a fool of myself? So that's the first skill. The second skill, after I've timed out, is for me to self-soothe. And self-soothing is a way, there's two different ways to self-soothe. One is behavioral. So things like dialectical behavioral therapy focus on things I can do to focus on my senses. So I can count the brown things on the wall, or I can count backwards from 100 by sevens. I can grab a shell in my hand and focus on the sensations. Anything that will focus my senses often takes us out of the thing that overwhelms us and into a sense of focus on the one thing, which obviously doesn't overwhelm us as much as all the other things that are overstimulating us. There's also self-talk, which is I can make it through this, or any other kind of thing you say to yourself that I'm going to make it through and it's going to be okay, to kind of calm yourself down. So those are the two ways we can self-soothe. Once we're soothed, the next step is to, as you can see on my screen share here, the next step after soothing is to connect with your feelings. So I often compare this to a car. When a car overheats, the thing that you do is you get the car off the road, out of traffic, and you turn the car off. Because if you leave the car running, that's what we call in human terms rumination, and it actually overwhelms the car more quickly and will make it overheat. So once we're off the road and turn it off, we can do some things to soothe the car. We can pour some lukewarm water on it. We can speed it up a little bit, but it's still going to take time for the car to cool off. And then we want to get under the hood and figure out what's going wrong. And so what mechanics do nowadays is they take the little plug and they plug it in to the thing, and it gives us a readout that says, hey, this is what's going on. In a similar way, our emotions are our readout system. And so getting good at learning to figure out your feelings so that you know what's going on inside of you then means you can go in and say, well, if this is what's happening, I now have some tools. How do I develop tools to know how to manage what's happening now that I understand what that is? And once all those tools that we see there are all individual tools until we get to the part of reconnecting. So steps 1 through 4 are all ways that I individually manage. Step 1 is about containing my feeling. Step 2 is about reducing the disturbance level so that I can actually get under the hood without burning myself. Step 3 is the diagnostic tool, and step 4 are the tools I use to take care of myself. So in terms of the reason they're in that order is I have lots of clients. So I was just talking with a couple coworkers today about a couple they're working with, and that couple, when they come into therapy, they come in with a lot of energy and they want to make something happen, and they get triggered really fast. And this couple is a very skilled couple. They work in a profession that suggests they know a lot about therapy, kind of the therapy coaching world. But over and over and over again, all those tools to help them connect with their feelings and understand what's going on, those go away the second they get triggered. And then they start, I actually differentiate between the triggered self and Mark. So there's a triggered Mark and there's a regular Mark, right? If my wife is interacting with the triggered Mark, she's not going to get very far. Triggered Mark is all about either avoiding being eliminated or trying to eliminate my wife, right? Trying to get rid of that threat. And so many people who are really, really, really good at understanding their own feelings are horrible at timing out. And so they're unable to establish really good relationships because all that work they do at the third skill level gets undermined when they go into those triggered states and just take each other out. And it's not a very helpful couple process. So I really want to work with people at the level of which of the skills in order are you not good at? So if we're not good at 1, let's work on that skill. If we're not good at 2, let's work at that skill. If we're not good at 3, let's work at that skill. And let's go down the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order until we get to that stage. I know I'm kind of just going through a very quick version of these skills, but I wanted just to introduce those as kind of the basic steps, and I may come back to them a little bit later in this presentation. So the next step is what's called the drama triangle. And I think many of you are probably aware of what the drama triangle is. But essentially, when we get emotionally reactive, we tend to step right onto the drama triangle. We're either the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor, one of those roles. And generally, we have a favorite, but we typically take all those roles. And there's a lot we can do with this. Mostly, I want to define that tonight and help you understand how you might get into those roles. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but these are really good identifiers for if I'm emotionally reactive or if I'm present. So to me, the more tools we get to recognize the difference between our good centered self and our kind of out of control triggered self, the more capacity we have to intervene and get back to a centered place over time. I actually put victim at the top of the triangle, not because there's a specific place, but often people don't see the victim as kind of having power. So I put the victim there on purpose just so people think, okay, the victim can be in the high power position. So the first question when it comes to the drama triangle is why do we do drama? And in my experience, when we get on the drama triangle, we can temporarily reduce our feeling of shame. We can also have a sense of power, and we are typically in a reactive state. So when I look at the drama triangle, I try and look at those two things especially. If I'm on the triangle, I'm reactive. And if I'm reactive, I'm reacting to try and find some sense of shame reduction and power. And as we go over each of these roles, I want you to kind of think about how power and shame reduction can happen. So in the victim role, again, that's not being victimized. Let's be clear about that. We all can be victimized by people. That's outside of our control. But staying in the victim role means I continue to act powerless where I might have power. I continue to feign incapability when I do have ability to do something different. We tend to deny our ability to empower ourselves. We act or feel defective. We play pretty good martyrs. And when people try and help, we tend to undermine their efforts. So that's the gist of the victim role. So the two questions that I said we would answer for every person is, how does that give us power? So one way that gives us power is if I'm in a position of being the victim, I can use that victim role to suck you in to help me. Because I'm the one who is over here and I just need people to come rescue me in different ways. It feels really good to have someone come do your work for you in a way. So that's one powerful position. Also, as far as shame reduction goes, did someone say something? Or was that an accident? Okay. As far as shame reduction goes, if I'm in the victim role, is it my fault that I'm in this role? No, it's the persecutor's fault. They're the bad guy. They're the ones who are doing those things that are making me be victimized. So in those positions, I have power to suck people in, and I also have power to reduce my shame because I'm the one who's being victimized. So that's the victim role. Then there's the persecutor role. Persecutor roles are a little tricky, and I'll tell you why in a minute. One, the persecutor has no weaknesses, therefore they can't be shamed. The focus is on the other person and all the issues they've set up, their weaknesses, how they're creating problems for you. Some of the clear-cut ways we're persecutors is to make offensive, demeaning, sarcastic comments, including swearing at them, calling names, etc. But some of the subtle ways is this tendency to lecture or preach or criticize. I think we're particularly good at that as parents. Instead of talking to and working with our kids, we tend to say, I'm going to tell you about how this, and we almost even take that voice when we do that. Teasing is also a persecutor role. Now, in my family, we tease a lot. One of the ways we reduce shame, actually, in my opinion, if somebody is walking along and trips, we're going to highlight that and laugh and be like, did you have a nice trip last fall? Those kind of silly things, as a way of kind of just acknowledging humanness. But teasing relentlessly, where you continue to harp on somebody's weaknesses and tell them and tease them about how they are, obviously is not a connective tease in any way. And teasing is a little tricky thing to do. Teasing and sarcasm are very tricky things to do in any sort of good sense, unless you get lucky. Patronizing and lots of questioning. When you ask a lot of questions, people start to feel like that big white light is on your face. And obviously, persecutors are blaming the other people for the problems they have rather than looking inward. So the shame reduction is, I don't have to be responsible for the problem because you're the problem. And the power is, I have power to tell you all the things you're doing wrong. And so that's that role. And finally, the rescuer role. The rescuer role is, I'm going to do for you what you can do for yourself. I'm going to come in and try and do stuff that actually makes you become weaker and less capable, rather than helping you in ways that you need help. That person whose name I cannot remember, that's the Russian psychologist, he talks about a thing called scaffolding. And scaffolding we use with children So think about when a child walks, right? The first things we do to help them walk is we grab their arms and we help kind of toggle them along. And eventually, as we scaffold a little level higher, we give them just our fingers and help them walk. And we take one finger off and they walk with just one finger, and eventually we'll hold them and release them as they try and walk. All those are little variations of scaffolding to the next level for somebody. As adults, we don't tend to think a lot about scaffolding, but when you think about teenagers, they're trying to gain an identity, they're trying to gain social skills. Are we really helping them? Well, as adults, it's harder to know what we can and can't do. And so it's a little easier to be blind to that, doing things for others. I really like the word disable. Rescuers, enabling does have a, outside of the addiction world, has a sense of helping somebody truly. So enabling in the addiction sense is bad, but really it's bad because it's disabling the other person. It's doing for them what they could do for themselves. And the payoff, the power there is, A, I'm seen as all powerful because I can help you, but also I don't need, if you need me, then I feel powerful to keep you in my life, which is a real big payoff for rescuer roles. Oftentimes they put their own needs first, they can't say no, and they do feel superior. Again, if I'm rescuing you, it's because I'm Superman, which means I don't have to feel shame. So, ultimately, one of the things I do with my clients is I'll identify in session with them. You can't do that with a partner. You can't say, hey partner, you're on the drama triangle. That's not going to be a very effective way to get them off the drama triangle. But I had a couple in my office this week, and they won't do timeouts. We've tried and tried and tried and tried to get them to do timeouts. And so I finally just had to sit down with them and say, you guys are doing really good work at kind of identifying your feelings. And I can see how hard you're working to try and make this work. And we had to talk a lot about timeouts. And so in session, there were several times where I actually stopped the process and said, uh-oh, something just shifted. And there's a book out there, actually 2 books written by the Arbinger Institute. One is called Leadership and Self-Deception, and the other is called The Art of Peace. I think that's what it's called. Those 2 books talk about ways that we kind of betray ourselves and in the process blame others for having betrayed ourselves. And there's 2 things they really talk about that I think are really critical points. But the first one is that we can have a heart of peace where we know we're grounded and we see people that we interact with as people, or we can have a heart of war. And war is where I'm going to attack you because I don't see you as a person. You're an object. And as an object, I want to destroy you, right? My experience is when we're triggered, we are objects. We see others as objects to be destroyed or gotten rid of. And so I often will point out when people's facial expressions shift. Are you right now in a place of war, or are you in a place of peace? And they go into a lot of detail about how even passive people can be in a place of war. It's not about passive or aggressive. And so there's a little more detail that I'm not going into in this presentation about that, but people get a certain look on their face when they get triggered. And so as we were in the session, I stopped them and said, where are you right now? And as you would imagine, their response was, I don't know. You think I'm a persecutor? And my response to them was, I don't know what you are. I just saw a shift in you. So let's talk about that. And each time we did that, I noticed them soften a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more to the idea of being on the triangle. So I will tell you this, and I know Dina and Daniel do this a lot in their classes that they do as well. The goal behind the drama triangle for me, and they may approach this differently, but the goal behind it is identification. If I know I'm on the triangle, I can take better care of myself. I can step off of the triangle, take a little time to take care of myself, and then I can get back to being off the triangle in a healthy way in the relationship. So in these cases, the first couple triangles we're going to discuss, which include the drama triangle, for me are unhealthy places to be. When we get on there, we're in an emotionally reactive state. And we have to figure out how to identify that we're in a reactive state and get off. So the triangle is one relational tool. Now let's talk very briefly about, so I had this couple, she was talking to him and said something about, well, I would hope you would see this, to which he responded with a, well, I do not, and he got really defensive. And I said to him, where are you at? And he goes, well, I'm feeling like a victim. And I had him identify what it was that triggered her there. And she's like, I wasn't trying to do that. And so we had to kind of break down that whether or not you think you're getting on the triangle, if one of the partners starts to react, you're on the triangle. And there's ways to get off. So where I was going with that, he went from being a victim to being a persecutor, right? Because she said something that made him feel like a victim, he persecuted her. And she went from what she didn't think was persecuting right down into the victim role as soon as he persecuted her, right? So I also want you to see that we can run around that whole triangle. I remember on a specific day years ago, driving down 121 Business with my wife, and she said something to me, and my immediate reaction in my head was to say, why do you have to say it that way? Which is being a persecutor. But I didn't say that. And I said, for a second, I said, why do I have to hear it that way? And that really calmed me down, and I felt a little more centered. And then I thought, but she always talks to me that way. And I kind of climbed over to the victim role. And I'm like, but, you know, I really should support her. And then I kind of climbed over into all these ways I could enable her to not have to take care of herself, but for me to do all the things for her. And all that happened in about 15 seconds. So we can run around that in a heartbeat. So the goal is not to be, one role is no better than the other. Getting off the triangle is the goal we want to have. Let's see. All right. I'm trying to get my slideshow to respond. So how do we break out of the drama? So the first thing we got to do is we got to recognize we're in the drama. That's what the acknowledgement of those roles and practicing those roles. I regularly suggest to people that they need to do what I call a remind. Every morning, just get up in the morning and review those, to take their mind, which normally doesn't pay attention to those things, and just point it in the direction of this awareness of, I don't want to be on the triangle today. These are the ways I generally get on, and I've got to recognize it. So once you've recognized it, you step off. You take some time to cool off, like the thermometer says, and then you say, okay, what am I feeling? And based on these feelings, let me write down some ways that I might handle this. As I write those down, one of those might be, I'm going to hit you over the head with a frying pan. That probably isn't a congruent thing to do. So as you look through your list, once you've made some potential ways to handle that, the suggestion is that you assess for which of those ways would actually be congruent. Once you've assessed for congruency, then the next step is to acknowledge risk. And what that means is, when I step into this choice I'm going to make, how might the person I'm going to take that risk with and do this thing with respond to me? Because if you go into that and you don't prepare for the possibility of how they might respond, then you might choose a way to express yourself that would trigger a lot of reactivity in them. And a small example of that is, early in my marriage, I would tell my wife I felt unloved, which to me is an emotion. It was congruent. I didn't feel loved in that moment. But for her, felt like I was saying I didn't feel like she ever loved me, right? So expressing the feeling of unloved, while it was congruent for me, was a big trigger for her. And so I learned that I could say something like, I feel unappreciated, or something like that, and she would be less reactive to that. So that's an example of, I can get to congruency, but all congruency does not necessarily mean, sorry, just a second. Somebody is on microphone and on video. If you wouldn't mind hopping off the video and the microphone, that'd be great. I don't see where you are right now. I found you.
I think they're off now.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then once you've done that, you got to make a choice, and you go back and you do the stuff of what I call catching and pitching. So that's again a brief summary of the triangle, getting back to a place where I can calm down, get congruent, come up with solutions, and assess how the person I'm going to speak to might receive that, and then approach them in a way that I can experience some positive outcomes. So that's the first triangle, the drama triangle. The next set of triangles I want to talk about have to do with finding support. So what we know is the hardest relationships to be in are primary relationships and our family relationships. They just have the most to lose, and so they tend to create the most energy. When we have 12-step programs, we go to those places because we don't have a lot of skin in the game there. There are people who can give us feedback and we can receive it. And eventually they can become good friends and we have more skin in the game. But there are people who we can take risks with. And so as we try and look for support, there's some dilemmas we might hit. And so I want to spend some time talking about some risks to looking for support as you try and there's a word we use in the therapy world called co-regulation. So when I'm really upset and I call my brother, he can either help me stay upset, or his way of being present with me can help me regulate down to a little bit less anxious state, for example. So co-regulation is when in the relationship, being connected to you and understanding each other helps me to kind of come down to a little bit more regulated state where I'm not so reactive. But there's some things we can do as we seek for support that can create a more problematic pattern. So we're going to look at these triangles. There's some symbols I just want you to understand. The little squiggly lines mean there's some emotional reactivity between people. The arrow means there's this kind of energy that moves away from the relationship that's kind of painful energy. The green line is a sense of connection or cohesion or a bond. And then the green line means we're coming out of being triangulated. And I'll tell you what that means in a second. And then the dotted line is where there's a threat to a relationship. So triangulation is what we do when we're in a relationship that starts to get full of anxiety. And to reduce that anxiety, we look outside of ourselves to a third party. And in doing that, what allows us to do is avoid the conflict and then, in that sense, stabilize the marriage temporarily. The problem with triangulation, though, is it doesn't put the work back into the relationship. The reason triangulation is not a good process is because it brings somebody in a way that takes away from the relationship doing its work. And so we're going to look at some different triangles. You might recognize those in your life. The first type of triangle we call an alliance triangle. And what that means is, as you can see, there's a dotted line. That means A and B is the dyadic relationship. So that's partner A and partner B. And C is the person we bring in. So in this example, you can see that there's a threat to the relationship, this dotted line between the couple, and partner A reaches out to person C and forms a really good bond with them. And they spend time talking about how awful B is. Man, B is so bad, and I can't believe you put up with him, her. Like, how could you do that? And they spend all their time making sure that they're against B. Now, you can understand, ultimately, that kind of triangle isn't healthy because it continues to further destroy the relationship with B while providing support for A. I see this a lot when people call their parents. If their parents aren't really centered, they call their parents, how could he treat you that way? I just can't even imagine that he would do X, Y, or Z, instead of kind of like just being a good listener and saying, well, that's really hard, I'm so sorry. We'll talk about a healthy form of triangling, which is not triangulation, in a few minutes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's an alliance triangle. I'm willing to bet at least a good number of times in your life, you've brought somebody in to kind of beat up the person you were in the dyadic relationship with. So here's a displacement triangle. So there's three types: an alliance triangle, a displacement triangle, and a substitution triangle. This is a type of displacement triangle where even though there's some stress between us as a couple, we push that stress towards a common cause. We choose something we can work on together, and our focus on that cause that we move forward in is the thing that helps us forget about the problems between us and focus on the problems outside of us that we're going to fight against. You can see that reduces the anxiety in the relationship, but it never really deals with the relationship problems. The second type is a little more, this is the common foe. I know of some couples that have gone into therapy. They started to hate the therapist, and their perpetual hatred of the therapist helped their relationship to stabilize because they had this common foe in the therapist that they both disliked, and so they could go home and talk bad about the therapist all the time and didn't have to talk about their problems anymore. They eventually fired the therapist, and I don't know what really happened long term, but my guess is when they couldn't complain about the therapist, but that can also be, somebody outside the family or a child. We choose a child to kind of identify as the problem, and we focus all our energy on the child rather than on ourselves. So whether it's a common foe or a common problem, that's what a displacement triangle does, is it puts the problem outside of the relationship rather than taking it inside the relationship. This one is very common in the field of sexual addiction. This is a substitution triangle where one partner forms a bond where they get emotional intimacy and perhaps sexual intimacy. So it starts potentially as an emotional affair where my partner won't listen to me, and so I'm going to look to you to have somebody who hears me, right? And that feels really good, and so you just eat that up. But again, it's at the destruction of the relationship, and can ultimately another type of substitution triangle is a power. We often do this with God, where we just give it all to God and he's supposed to give us all the answers. Now that can quickly turn into a coalition where I'm trying to use, I have people all the time. I do work with some people who are religious, and they come in quoting scripture in God's name to have power in the relationship. Like when you seek for power to tell you, and if you're a therapist, you might have seen this. People come into your office and say, hey, what's the right answer, Mark? You just tell us who's wrong, and then we'll go from there. Now that doesn't ever work. You don't tell people because then it starts to be a coalition, right? It'll switch right then to, it's me and the person I told was right against the person who's wrong. But that's another form of a substitution triangle. Now, this is the only healing triangle that I know of. It's not triangulation, because what happens is a third party is brought in, and that third party is able to be neutral, non-reactive, and ultimately push it back down into the relationship. So instead of trying to step in and take care of things, they're going to push that back. So a good therapist, if you go see a therapist, if you're going to notice that they're going to listen to you, understand you, but they're going to ultimately push you back to those relationships you're struggling in and help you look and focus on that relationship. So you can see that green arrow is pushing back to the dyad. So as the energy tries to push out, that healing happens there. I did a study in my undergrad and my master's program on the process of healing from conflict through use of prayer. And we interviewed a bunch of couples as part of that. And there were three types of couples and the way they used God. One was the Band-Aid couple, who at the end of their big fight would say a little prayer and say, thanks God for getting us through this, slap a Band-Aid on the wound and move forward. Not surprisingly, those couples were usually younger than about 35 to 40. In the 40 to 60 range, there was a type of couples that were the stop, drop, and pray couples. And they would use God in a healthy way. A lot of them would anyway. I remember one lady, she said, you just can't pray to God and say, strike down my husband, because God loves your husband as much as he loves you. Like, God just has a tendency to be neutral and loving to everyone. And so that eventually calms you down and God pushes you back to do the work in your relationship. So that's an example of how we can use God in a healing way. We use some examples of how God could be non-healing in a coalition. So ultimately, as we try and seek support, the thing we have to be really careful about is to find people who will help push us back to do the work in our relationship. Not just take the anxiety off of us, but really help us focus on, and I'm going to help us to find a way to soothe and regulate so we can come back to the relationship and do the work of co-regulation together so we can come back and resolve the problems. So now we've got a triangle, the drama triangle, that helps us identify when we're in the drama. We also have a triangle that we're trying to look to see if we can, when we look for help, we find people who are able to push us back to do our work, but to support us and love us in the right ways. And making sure that we don't try and form those unhealthy triangles is a really important piece of the puzzle. So the last piece that's a triangle, which is a pyramid with lots of triangles in it, is what I call the communication and trust pyramid. So as we've talked today, steps 1 through 4 of the thermometer are the bottom rung of the pyramid, that understanding of self. And I call that 85% of the work, because if I can just get grounded and connected with myself and I understand me, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get untriggered, figure out my feelings, and figure out how to take care of myself to the best of my ability. The next step in the triangle is to try and understand the other person. And my experience is when we're overwhelmed, the best way to deal with trying to resolve problems is always to do what I call catching and pitching in a very structured way. And that means I'm going to say, I have something I'd like to talk to you about. Are you in a place where we can talk? And if you are, we're going to sit down across from each other and we're going to have a conversation. And the first thing we're going to do is one of us will be the pitcher and one of us will be the catcher. The pitcher's job is to have wrapped all their, metaphorically, to wrap the ball. And if we wrap that ball just right, that means we've got our feelings figured out and we're ready to throw that in a reasonable way to the person who's across the plate. In the catcher role, my only job is to catch what you said and say, and these are, I like to use exact words, but so what I hear you saying is that when I did this, you felt this. Did I get that right? Okay, is there anything else? So I'm going to catch the ball, reflect it to you, set it down. Is there anything else? I'm just going to keep catching. What I see with most people is they play ping pong. One person starts to throw a ball, they've tried to wrap, and the other person, well, I don't think that's that way. And they start to, each of them go back and forth, kind of fighting with each other. So it's really important as you step into understanding each other that your goal is to really hear everything the other person has to share and in a non-defensive way. As you look at the PowerPoint that's up here, notice those ladders. I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but those ladders that are there mean if at one point I'm trying to catch and pitch with you and it's not working, I'm going to go down back into I'm going to time out and go back into understanding myself. Because if we're not able to connect and understand each other, we probably have to do a little more work to understand ourselves. Once I finished pitching, then we reverse roles, or catching, we reverse roles. And your job then is to pitch to me and I'm supposed to catch. And we do that back and forth until we feel like we really understand each other. And the way I know if someone understands the person, at least as a therapist, is they can say, in a nutshell, this is what my partner is struggling with. And this is what they're needing or wanting. And the other person could say, this is my nutshell. And knowing that nutshell, now we have the pieces we want to have a solution to. And that's the third step on the communication and trust pyramid. So the third step is to discuss solutions. Now, I tend to talk about thinkers and feelers. My sister highlighted that in the Enneagram, there's doers as well. So I know there's probably doers, but I tend to break it down into thinkers, doers, and feelers. Thinkers often want to jump right to solutions. And when you jump to solutions, you tend to trigger your partner pretty quickly into defensiveness. So that's why we don't jump straight there. But there are some ways to kind of contain a discussion about solutions. So first of all, I try and use catching and pitching. So one person says, so I've got a solution, are you open to hearing it? Okay, so I thought this would be blah, 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 blah. And the person who's catching does the same thing. They say, I hear your solution is this, did I get that right? Yes, okay. Once they've caught that solution, they have three choices, which may not be super legible on your screen, but I'll read them to you. The first one is, I agree, yeah, that works. Sometimes when you really listen well, a solution naturally comes of it. That's about 5% of the time that you just listening will provide a solution you hadn't considered would work before. The second option is, we could maybe do that, but I have a few concerns. If we can address those, I think that solution might work. And then you discuss the concerns and you work through them. And the third is, thanks for sharing. Can I share my ideas? And then you switch roles. If you look at that, I kind of think how much you need therapy in this situation. For my clients, if you agree right away, you don't need a therapist. If you have some concerns, you may need a little therapeutic support to sort through those concerns until you figure them out. And if you both have solutions that neither of you can agree on, you probably need a third party, right? That's when you would get a healthy triangle in therapy to help you sort through problems. The last piece of this communication and trust pyramid is the apply and revise piece. No matter how good the solution you come up with, the best solutions you tend to come up with are only 80% right. And so I have a lot of couples where they work really hard to get solutions, and then someone comes and says, I'm not sure I want to do that solution anymore. And they get really emotionally reactive. Well, we worked so hard on this and I can't believe you're changing it on me and la, 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 la. So I always try and get couples to say, so this is our solution for now. Can we set maybe a week from now, can we put it on our calendar to come back and see how the solution's working? And then we can, after we've applied a little bit, we can revise it to fit with some of the things we might not have been able to totally consider. Again, at any of these stages, you can shift back down to the next level if you're feeling overwhelmed and not making the progress you need to make. Trying to think if there's anything that I missed on this. So the reason I call it the trust pyramid is because if I see my partner trying to really sort through their feelings and seeing them do that, I can trust them at that level. If I see them being willing to catch and pitch and sort through their feelings, I can receive them at that level and go, yeah, I can trust you there. But I have a lot of couples who are like, yeah, you hear me, but I don't believe that you really want a solution, right? So no, you don't trust until you can learn to form solutions. You can't really trust each other around coming up with solutions. So all of those levels on the pyramid are actually levels of trust that you can build as you get better. As a therapist, and I'm kind of going between client and therapist, the role you're in, but as a therapist, I also try and take this approach when they come into my office. Instead of going through all these steps, I say things like, have you sorted through your stuff? Are you ready to catch and pitch? Yes. Have you already caught and pitched? Yeah, okay. Can you nutshell that for me? If so, let's go right to solutions. And so that's a really good way to see where people are at when they come into therapy is, are they in a place where they can do these things already, or do they need some support? At which level do they need support? So kind of in summary for tonight, then, if we want to be connected in relationships, we have to learn to regulate ourselves. We have to gain the skills of the thermometer, which are timing out, soothing ourselves, connecting with our feelings, and being in a place where we understand them and have tools around them well enough that we can then go try and share with our partner. If I'm not calmed down and in a good place, catching and pitching is really just a recipe for disaster. If I can't get calmed down, I have some ways that I can do that. I can go to healthy relationships and ask for support to help me figure out what I need to do to go back to my relationship and re-encounter that relationship in a more healthy way. I hope you see that therapy is a healthy triangle. If you have a good therapist and you're both willing participants, then therapy provides a really good triangle to help your relationship heal and put the responsibility back in between the relationship. And then lastly, The skills needed, once I understand myself in the communication and trust pyramid, the skills needed to come to you and really try and listen to you, to understand your perspective and to come up with solutions because I care about you and not go back into that triggered state. I think those are all the things that I wanted to cover tonight. I guess there's a time to open this up to questions. Is that right, Daniel?
Yeah, just, and if you wanted to pull it off of the, there you go. Then you can see most everybody else who wants to. So Mara had a question. What was the power and shame for the rescuer?
So the power for the rescuer is I get to come in and save the day. I get to look like Superman. Look how powerful I am that I can do this for you. The shame reduction is I don't have any shame because I'm Superman. Like there are no flaws in me. You can't point them out because I'm rescuing you, right? And so there's nothing you can say because I am the rescuer in that sense. Does that answer your question? Amara?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I used to joke that the fastest way to get information to my mom was to tell my sister. And I mean, it was a very effective system and we knew how to play that. And it wasn't until one or more of us got to where we were tired of doing that. And, you know, I was taught that in my first introduction to triangles, that those types of triangles always bound the anxiety up. It never released it. And it was in the direct communication that the difficulties could get worked out. And it was in the direct communication that the anxiety could be dealt with rather than just keeping it held into the relationship like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is such a nice cheat though. Short term.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
I liked your idea of using the word disable rather than enable. I think that's a really accurate description of what happens.
I think it also tends to make it easier for those who tend to disable to label it clearly. Somehow a lot of my clients tend to really resonate with the word disable, like, yeah, I don't want to disable somebody.
Right.
At least not consciously disable somebody.
Any other questions?
Hi.
Mark? Here's
I have a question. This is Barb.
Hey, Barb.
Okay, let's say on the triangulation between A, B, and C, let's say you bring in C and you do it in a healthy way to where you're catching and pitching with C. Is that still triangulation? I mean, you know, like you want to bounce it off with somebody in a healthy way. I don't know.
So that wouldn't be triangulation necessarily. The key we're looking for is that person I'm turning to pro my relationship? Are they trying to push me back into the relationship to do my work? Or are they gonna reinforce that I am a victim, or you poor you, or yeah, this other person's a horrible person? If the goal is to go to them, to have them help you soothe, and you know that person is somebody who's going to push you back to the relationship to try and do the work you know you need to do instead of help you avoid the work, then that's absolutely a healthy connection. It's just
right.
It's just being clear that that person is actually that person to you.
Right. If they can use like neutral active listening or something to be neutral and just reflectively listen.
Yeah. Exactly.
Great.
As long as they can remain neutral and they push you back to the relationship, that's a healthy co-regulation through a resource, a friend or a family member that can say, there's still work you need to do there. It's just really hard to stay there. There's a limited group of resources. And if you find somebody doing that, I think the key is you have to ask yourself, after I have this interaction, do I feel more ready to go back to my relationship that I was struggling with, or less ready? Because
Right.
if I don't feel more ready after that, then something about this may not be as supportive as I hoped it would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. Any other questions?
Well, Mark, thank you very much. Want to thank you again for stepping in and helping us with the presentation. And for anybody who would like CEUs, reach out to info@d2counseling.com and we can set up for CEUs. A little while back, Dr. Hijazi and I were talking about, we were running into a situation happening in relationships where when there is a break in the relationship or the relationship has been ruptured, we were finding people that were really struggling with a process on how to mend or how to repair the relationship. And so what she and I have done is we are actually the speakers for next month's presentation. And our topic is relationship repair, the foundation for maintaining a healthy relationship. And we're going to talk specifically about the steps that are required, both for the person that is the offender, if I can use that language, and the person that has been offended. There's two different paths that have to be walked there for a healthy relationship repair. And that's what our topic will be next time. Hopefully, if we get, we may be lucky enough to make that our first in-person presentation. It'll be the third Tuesday of next month. So with that, I want to thank Unity for co-hosting with us and thank all of y'all for being here. And for Dr. Dina Hijazi and I, we thank you for the opportunity to work with you through this lecture series.
So the next lecture will be May 18th, just so you have that date. And again, look for emails because we're meeting with Unity in 2 weeks to discuss whether or not we can do a hybrid and go live and do Zoom. So we'll keep you posted.
Thanks again, Mark. Everybody be careful.
Thank you so much, Mark. Take
Take
care
care.
of yourselves, everyone.